Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of our monthly real estate roundtable, where we unpack the latest trends in the housing markets in Toronto, in Vancouver, and of course, nationally. And joining us every month, of course, is Steve Saretsky from Vancouver. Welcome, Steve.
Good to be back on. It was a pleasure, sir.
Awesome. And today, our host, for the last time, for those of you who don't know, Urmi Desai will be moving on. This will be her final episode. She's taken on a position as the interim executive director at the Textile Museum of Canada. So this is going to be her final episode as the host on our roundtable. Urmi, welcome for our last show together.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Steve. As I've written on my LinkedIn, end of an era, I really enjoyed looking back with John on a video on our channel on everything we built over the last 15 years and explaining why my life story makes sense for me stepping into this new role. I will not be a stranger to this show, but I think I will return as a guest.
There you go. Fantastic.
Hopefully, if,
The
if
intro
you guys
wasn't as
will have
good.
me.
The intro wasn't as good, just so you know. It's all right, John.
Urmi did, Urmi
I'm
did it.
trying.
Urmi did it better.
Urmi did
you,
it better,
you
but
do it better, but
I usually mention the weather, which half of our comments don't like. But I'm Canadian. You have to mention the weather.
Awesome.
So it is back to me. I can't let go of my duties. So let's just start with our regular market update. Who wants to go first? We always go to Steve. Steve, in Vancouver, what is the market looking like? We are now in the start of the second month. Any fall bounce back?
yeah. No, like, and honestly, no bounce back from what I've seen and through the September data, through anecdotal feet on the ground. If you look at sales, I think that's funny because I think they were up like 1% year over year. So people look at that like, oh, market's getting better, but listings were actually higher. September inventory is the highest, I think, since September of 2013. So just, yeah, overall high levels inventory. I think we have 8 months of inventory for sale now. What we've seen really in September, I'd say, to sort of summarize it, is basically, yeah, sure, activity's picked up a little bit from sort of the frozen levels we had in the spring. But I think what we're seeing is basically the things that are transacting now are transacting at lower prices. I think that's kind of a continuation of the trend, which is like buyers are starting to sort of step back in, but that's happening at lower prices. Negotiations are difficult. Inspections are being used to grind prices even lower. And so I think sellers that have been kind of holding on to their prices are just losing that battle. And those that need to sell, want to sell, and have to move on are ultimately having to take lower prices.
I see. And John, what are you seeing in Toronto? We talked last time about the return of the only if I could sell my house
Mhm.
condition. What
Yeah.
else is happening? Is that still continuing? And again, are the conditions very difficult for sellers and shifting in the buyer's favor?
Yes. I mean, super difficult. I mean, the past couple of months, we did see a slight uptick in sales, including in September. I mean, technically, sales are up year over year, but I mean, we're talking about a 10-ish% increase, at least for low rise, off of a very low base. So it's not like strong sales. And the market is still super slow. I mean, I think there's a lot like Vancouver, very few showings for houses and for condos. Like honestly, like houses that we would have listed, forget like 2 years ago at the boom, but even like pre-COVID, like a normal market, homes that would have had like 40 showings in the first week are getting 5 showings. So it's a very different market. I think sellers here in Toronto are struggling to adapt to it because everyone's so used to home selling in a week. Um, some are kind of freaking out. They don't know. They think like, oh my God, the sky's falling. But to Steve's point, prices are transacting at much lower prices when compared to a year ago. And again, that's largely because buyers have the leverage, and buyers are seeing what's selling. When someone sells at a bit of a discount in your neighborhood, that's like suddenly the new comparable and anchor that buyers are looking at, right? And yeah, and as a seller, you can hold out as long as possible and say my home's unique, and some do, but some just who need to move on say, okay, fine, I'm gonna kind of chase that other comparable sale And that's how generally the market is grinding down. Like this grinding down that we're seeing is how markets typically slow down, like how price declines typically happen, which is slow. You know, what we saw in 2022 was quick because people were caught in two transactions, at least in Toronto, and had no choice but to sell at a discount. Whereas now it's a slower grind down. And again, it's just like no one's buying homes. So, and there's just a ton of inventory. I mean, going back to sales being up a little bit, yeah, sure, but active listings are up even more than sales. You know what I mean? So the market is actually softer this year than it was last year. So this is why, like, you can't just look at, you know, sales increasing as the market indicator. The market's softer, which is why prices are actually cooling. And as Steve said, it's the same trends. Like people are using conditions to grind down prices, and it's a tough market right now for sure.
You think those
So
prices, John, are actually moving slow? Sorry, Urmi, but like I don't know. I just like it's funny. I was going to ask you what your HPI, your benchmark price was down on a year-over-year basis. Like in Vancouver, it says we're down 3%. If you segment that out to like detached apartments, it says we're down 4% year over year. But like what I've seen this year is anecdotally is I think I see like to me it looks like he priced a lot of these things out and they're selling closer to like 10% this
Yeah.
year.
Yeah.
I think we've seen like a pretty aggressive move off. And I should caveat that with saying is like I think where the benchmark and maybe the median prices and stuff are missing sort of the metric is the stuff that's actually selling today is like the move-in ready stuff. It's like great location. It's like nice furniture. It's all fancy. Like everything like is like dialed in. Like that stuff will sell. And maybe it sells in 2 or 3 weeks and gets like a somewhat reasonable price. And then I feel like everything else is just like sitting, especially like the houses that need like a full renovation. You know, it's an estate sale where it's like original to the 1980s. It's a condo in kind of like a subpar location, middle of the building. Like it's like, and I feel like all of that stuff like just isn't transacting. And because it doesn't transact, it doesn't show up in like the sales data to ultimately drag like that median price lower. And so I'd say like if you need to move, if you need to sell like a mediocre product, I think you're down at least 10% this year.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree. The average prices, yeah, I don't think reflect that. I think again in Toronto, average median prices from low rise are down around 5, 6%. So like detached semis. I think condos are around the same. And I agree. I mean, in some areas, 100% it is closer to 10. I did a video this week where I looked at it and it matters by geography. It's like some of the suburban areas on average are down 8%, whereas some of the other areas are down 2%, right? So, you know, Toronto and Durham, where inventory is a little tighter, where there's like 4 months of inventory, average price are down 2%. York Region, Peel and Halton, where, you know, where prices are down 8%, are seeing, sorry, what that have the most inventory are seeing prices down 8%. So I agree with you. And in some types of homes, you're probably closer to 10%. So the averages you got to take with a grain of salt.
oh, what a great insight. So it's the smaller cream of the crop not taking the price hits, but disproportionately, there was a time have doorknob will sell.
Mhm.
It was like the have a pulse, sort of equivalent. And now, no. So that's very interesting. So probably it's a segmentation you don't see in the data, but
Yeah.
certain kinds of product are probably carrying more of the hit.
Yeah.
Sorry, and just to add to that, like it's interesting because I think this is where when you look at what the real estate boards report, and then obviously the media will just report on what the real estate board tells them, is when you look at like the average price or the median price or the benchmark price, like when you start segmenting it out, it's like actually it's kind of all over the place. It's like, you know what I mean? So it's like, I'm looking at like benchmark price for condos in the valley, it's like 9% down. But then if you look at average price per square or median sales price is only down like 2%. Like, well, how's there a 7% difference here? So I think it's what's happening is like when you have these changing market conditions and like very little liquidity, I think it's you really have to try to read through the noise.
Yeah. The other thing I've been noticing in Toronto at least is, and especially like in the city of Toronto, like a third of homes are selling for over asking, which sounds like the market's booming, but it's a misleading indicator. Like certainly maybe 10% of the homes are like those nicest ones that should have offer dates and are getting good prices. But the other 20 are actually transacting at the low end of the value range, even though they're selling for 100 over asking, right? Because they're getting 8 showings, they only get 1 or 2 offers. The seller feels like, well, that's all I got. That's what my home's worth. And they're transacting at lower value ranges. So, like this bidding war strategy, while it worked when the market was booming because people were paying at the high end and above of market value, in a slow market, I feel like it's actually dragging prices down further because it seems like the sellers are just rushing the seller and taking whatever they get within the first week. So,
John, this is where I feel like it's so important now to actually have like people that are like on the ground and actually like doing business, like that have experience, you know what I mean? I've been like, I just look at like, these are probably the markets where like, if you're just like a CMHC, analyst in a back office somewhere, you look at the data, like the data for me tells me that Greater Vancouver home sales were up 1% year over year, and the median sales price is up 1.6% from last year. So on the surface, you're probably looking at that and saying, it looks like the market's recovering.
mhm.
And I don't see that at all. I think when you actually you're on the ground and you're dealing with negotiations on a daily basis, you see like this is not the case.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, in my new role, I'm not supposed to be overly critical of anyone. If you are the authority, it's very interesting that the CMHC doesn't get the principal rule of real estate: location, location, location.
Mm-hmm.
And we are talking very, very highly idiosyncratic market. This is not the stock that sells, at such and such units at one price, or the widget, as John often says. And I think time and time again, we see analysis letting us down, where, again, housing doesn't fit those parameters.
Mm-hmm.
And I think until the powers that be get that, we are going to continue to see the distortion. Now, listen, I've been a seller and I've been a buyer, so I'm not critical of either person in the market at all. What is interesting is how long the seller's optimism has hung in. Are you saying, John and Steve, at certain parts of the market now, with a certain type of product, sellers are finally realizing the tide is changing?
Mm-hmm.
Because it hasn't been good news for a while.
I think most are realizing it. I think sellers are holding on for a while, which is partly why inventory built up, right? And that's like the normal process. It's like sellers are stubborn, they're hanging on. I've not reduced my inventory builds up, and then people just start saying, "Forget it, I need to move on," right? And they drop their price. And like when you see all your neighbors selling for less than what you're asking, I mean, eventually, if you want to move on, you're going to lower your price. So I think
John,
sellers are adjusting right now.
Yeah, because like we can see it, like obviously it's funny, right? Because it's like, you're hired to do a job, but the view of the client in not all cases, but in a lot of cases, like, oh, this realtor just wants me to drop the price so they can sell and get their check and move on. But in reality, a lot of this is driven through data, which is like you can, John, you and I can chat about it. We can see the inventory building. We can see sort of the conditions that are developing, and I'll go and say, listen, you're better off to go out there and set the new price than let like your neighbor set it for you, because that's what's going to happen. And so like I've just seen a lot of cases this year where you come on at like an elevated price because you're like reluctant to accept market conditions. Then all of a sudden, 3 weeks later, your neighbor lists an identical unit at a lower price, and now you're like, uh-oh, I'm no longer competitive. Now I've got to reduce. And then like what we've seen is we've actually just seen like units effectively competing, where it's like one person reduces, then the other guy reduces, the next person reduces, and then one person just says, you know what, I'm out, and just accepts like this low ball offer. And then it basically resets like the other 2 or 3 units or whatever that are available in the building.
Well, an observation, agents and brokers know this, but now after 15 years of covering the industry, I see is that stigma. When a house doesn't sell when you think it would sell,
Mm-hmm.
and it's because of price, buyers that approach it don't know that. And I know all the time that I've been a buyer and something just sitting there, and because it was wrongly priced, my assumption is something secretly wrong with this house.
Yeah.
They've gone through offers or it fell apart. And so, for every seller who thinks the agent is moving them on, and brokers, I have seen over the years that that stigma is very real. So psychology plays a huge part across this market.
It does play a role. And I think one thing is, I mean, I've seen listings now that have been on the market since April, May, obviously at ridiculous prices. And they're, of course, reducing now and selling at more realistic prices. But the reality is, had they been more realistic in April and May, they probably would have got an extra 100 or 75,000 because the market has slowed down a lot since the start of this year. So being stubborn didn't really pay off, and in fact probably hurt some of these sellers. And you're right. I think a lot of people look at those homes and wonder what's wrong with it. It's been sitting there for 6 months.
It's
Well,
basically
I
just like
can't.
you're always like one step behind the market, right? It's like you
Mhm.
Yeah.
reduce, but you reduce 6 weeks later. But like over
Yeah.
that 6 weeks, the market has already moved again. And so you're just constantly like one step behind where you need to be, which I think is probably the worst spot possible.
Well, I blame no one because as a seller, I'm the worst client, and as a buyer, I'm the worst client. And John, unfortunately, is going to be my real estate agent for life, and he has
Honesty.
to bear the brunt of this. And it would always be like, see, perfect home, just got mispriced. John would explain this, and I'd say, no, what's really wrong with it? What's really wrong with
I
it?
think the other challenge too
Yeah.
is when it sits now is like I feel like you kind of just get buried in the inventory, which is to say like there's so much to sift through right now
Hmm.
that like you kind of just get lost in the shuffle,
Hmm.
which is, you know what I mean? Like people when they're searching, they have like their auto searches set up now on all these different sites. It's like, yeah, when you have a new listing or a price reduction, like it pings that search notification, right? So, but like if you're not doing anything, you're not relisting or you're not changing your price. In many cases, you just kind of get lost in this like mass sort of inventory pile.
Final point on this. The other word that we would use if we're outside the industry is this is the market correction that was needed. What do you two feel about this? If more sales are now happening, but it's because the prices are dropping, is that just the necessary condition? And this is the market correction we've been, a lot of people have been thinking needs to happen. We've been talking about the affordability crisis here forever.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's like the market operating the way the market naturally operates. You know what I mean? It got too heated. We had an insane bubble. Prices got ahead of themselves. Everyone thought real estate's easy money, and now it's adjusting and correcting. And I think yeah, it is the kind of adjustment that the market needed.
I think I'm just looking at it right now. So if you go 817. Yeah, so I mean, like the benchmark, John, in Greater Vancouver, is like we've gone through this correction, which I think is much needed, but we're still 40% higher. The benchmark's 40% higher than it was back in September of 15. So 10
September
years,
of 15.
September of 2015. So it's up 40% over the last 10 years, which I think for a levered asset,
Still pretty,
yeah,
yeah.
I don't know. I think people just need to put things into context and
Yeah.
reality, which is like it's
Well, I don't
the
think we,
growth,
yeah,
the growth over the last 10 years has just been so
It's
abnormal
still high. You're
that
right.
yeah.
people
Well,
people just assume that it would continue.
yeah. Well, absent Doc and Marty McFly, I'm not sure we're going to fly back to 2015 prices in our DeLorean, but definitely, I think a price correction is needed. It's just
Yeah.
so out of reach for so many average buyers, and we've been hearing that again and again. And now that we've seen a downtrend in temporary workers, especially hitting the GTA, and some of the other excess demand taken out of the market, we're seeing that. So before we move on, that's kind of the middle of the market. I want to talk about a part where sometimes we think is the canary in the coal mine, which starts to signal a greater problem, and that's the power of sale data. And that data is always trickier to account for and assess. But John, recently you tweeted very interestingly, I'm throwing this chart up here. We're starting to see clear signs of financial stress emerging across the GTA housing market. And the data on power of sale or POS listings shows exactly where that stress is hitting hardest. And interestingly, John, in this chart that you have up here, we are seeing the very far outlying areas of the GTA, Brock, Ajax, Stouffville, Oshawa being hit, but also some of the more heartlands, I'd say, of their various regions. So I wouldn't call Brampton, Pickering, maybe Milton, maybe, but Brampton, these are some of the more moving into the heartlands of their area. Toronto, there in the middle. What's interesting, John, is I see the York region, which was kind of the center
Mhm.
of the 2017 bubble, seeing less power sale declines this time.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that's a lot of from Richmond Hill up. You're seeing the York region
Mhm.
holding pretty strong. So not strong though. Power of sale means power of sale. So
Yeah.
how did you get this data and what are your thoughts on this trend?
So, I mean, the data is kind of hard to come by. I mean, the only way we can do it is by analyzing really the seller's name effectively in the MLS data field. So, oftentimes it'll have power of sale or a particular bank or a lending institution. So, we do the analysis that way. And then we just basically see what areas have the highest volume. And what I did was I said, okay, let's look at, instead of looking at the number of power sales, we got to look at the number of power sales relative to new listings because Toronto has the highest number of power sales, but we also have like half of the sales in the GTA. So it's a misleading metric. So yeah, a lot of these outskirts were had the highest volume. And again, I think it's just speaking to, you know, people probably it's just like leverage in some of these markets, people probably just went overextended, took on too much debt on our and are struggling keeping up now. But I think what's being missed when people keep talking about the power of sales, I don't even think it's the actual number of power sales that is the important metric. I think what is being missed is the fact that for the 1,000 power of sales that are, say, listed and were on the market this year, there's probably another two, three, or four of homes on the sale that are approaching power of sale, where the vendors are desperate and need to sell to actually avoid losing their home. You know what I mean? And this is to me the more important part that we don't have really the concrete data on, but that influences the market in the price adjustments and the decline in prices because these owners don't want to get kicked out of their house. They need to sell. And I think this is the more kind of concerning metric because yes, power sales will go up, but there's a lot of people in financial distress now, even if they're not technically a power sale. And I think that's the more important trend.
Right. We saw that in the 2008. If anyone saw the short movie and even in the 1990s
Mm-hmm.
in Canada's downturn, that was a leading indicator. Steve, is power of sale a story in Vancouver yet?
We did, yeah, it's so funny. We don't really do power of sales in BC. I think it's just like a different court process. Effectively, like if you're delinquent on your loan, the lender has to apply to the court. The judge will typically give the homeowner, a certain period of time for them to try to sell it on their own. Usually that doesn't happen. It usually doesn't work out because the seller says, "Oh, I gotta try to aim it for this high price," and then so eventually the lender can apply for like effectively conduct of sale, or I think that's equivalent to power of sale. We call it different here. We basically just call them like court ordered sales. But yeah, if you look at the number of new listings, which we track here and our back end, foreclosure listings, they're running at levels last seen kind of like 2014-ish, which was like a pretty soft market. So like we're getting back to higher levels for sure off of a record low base. So I don't think it's as prevalent as what you guys are seeing in the GTA, but I think there's a trend here, and I think the trend will probably continue, which is more people falling behind on payments and obviously lend. I look at all these like private lenders, right? It was like now you have to look at like liquidity and loan to value, right? Loan to value ratios. If as John talked about and I talked about, like a lot of these really bad properties are down maybe 10% this year. So that's a real change to your loan to value all of a sudden. Where yeah, if you're a lender, you're going to start getting a little bit more nervous.
What's interesting is, I mean, just touching on this, I was speaking at an event hosted by one of the big U.S. banks, and of course, every bank was there. Everyone's talking about power sale. People are talking about it from a bank perspective, and even from like smaller private lenders mix. And the interesting point many of them made is like, despite I mean, because everyone's talking about it from the financial, you know, institutions perspective, very few are actually noticing any real losses. I mean, because many of them had ton of equity in them, even sort of the private or mixed where you'd think are the riskier, of course. Many of them in Canada had so much equity that even with a decline in value, when they're selling them as power of sales, they're not actually taking on too many losses, right? So people still have equity in their homes. They just can't manage the payments, is what's happening, which is very different from like what happened in the US financial crisis where people buying with zero down, had no equity, you know what I mean? And everyone just mailed in their keys.
I'm not sure the
Yeah.
Canadian as version of that where the people get hit harder than the banks.
Well,
feels any better.
mhm.
In 2008, both went down in the US, but it seems once again, the Canadian banks, and we've talked about this, have a way of making sure their ratios make sense. And so it's usually the smaller, the homeowners and other people who went too far, probably at the end of a huge run, probably getting hit it the hardest.
Yeah.
That is an interesting trend, and it's sad. Like, it's one thing to just watch this. I'll never forget in the 1990s in my subdivision and in the GTA, I was young and seeing that happen across my neighborhood and our parents' friends affected. Just obviously hoping the best for everybody. We can always say a million times you should have known better, but the reality to hit every single family is really hard.
Hmm.
And I really do feel for that. So moving on to the condo market, we have some competing views here on the condo market. So, and the competing views here are not yet between Steve and John. That's going to come later in the show. But to be clear, these are amongst our authorities. So, Steve, you tweeted the last time we saw this level of developer-owned unsold inventory was 24 years ago. And you're quoting there the president, Greg Zaddy, of, I would assume, a large developer.
Rennie,
And
no,
Rennie.
Rennie. And what is Rennie? Sorry, that's my.
So Rennie's Bob Rennie's company. Bob Rennie's kind of like, they call him the condo king. He used to be a big realtor in Vancouver. Then he basically morphed his business into basically a pre-construction marketing firm. So he's the largest, or his company is Rennie is the largest pre-sale marketing firm. So when you have buildings to sell, their company comes in and basically does all the sales and marketing for those buildings.
Interesting. So that's even more interesting, Steve. Thank you for that. So they're signaling a crisis. But as John tweets, meanwhile, our authorities, the CMHC, Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, published a piece saying, is Toronto's condo market downturn a repeat of the 1990s? And their answer, John says, was unsurprisingly no. I'm a bit surprised. Feels like it should be. So, what would the average person make of all this mixed messaging from, again, our so-called authorities, and then we have industry players calling the alarm? Is this, the usual sloganeering? Steve, jump in first.
Did you read that?
Well,
Did you?
John and I have always joked on the show, which is to say that whatever CMHC says, you can do the opposite and you'll probably make some money. So that would be my first inclination. Yeah, and this is kind of going back to like the earlier part of the conversation where I said, listen, like if you're just sitting in a back office and you're just crunching numbers, you're like, well, it doesn't look that bad. But like I said, when you're kind of like in the weeds day to day dealing with home buyers and home sellers, I think it tells you a lot more. It tells you a lot more things than the actual stats sometimes do. So that's kind of my takeaway is I think that it's a challenging market. And I think right now just sort of navigating it. And I've had a lot of issues with CMHC. I think they do a great and important service, but I have a lot of issues with how they report and their views in the market. Like John, like the big one was we need to build 500, whatever it was, 5 million homes by 2031 to hit like affordability, which was such a ridiculous statement of policy for many reasons, which I'm not going to get into. But anyways, John, I'll defer to you.
Yeah. Did you read that condo report by any chance?
I like skimmed through it. I saw your tweet thread, and then I was like, I got to read this. And I was like, I think I got like a couple minutes in, and I was like, I just can't.
Yeah, I gotta watch the Blue Jays instead.
Yeah. Just like, I don't know, just CMHC stuff, I think is just.
Not to interrupt, John. Go ahead. Again, I think we all value CMHC. We know, and we have colleagues and friends that work there, and we know how hardworking and so the backbone of the stats that we rely on are there. But John, once again, what is with the top line messaging?
It's funny because I actually had lunch with another kind of senior person in the industry, and their message was the same as what Steve just said. It's like, doesn't their research and analysis seem a little odd to you or a little off? Like it doesn't make sense. And, and again, I think there's maybe these differences between, economists who sit in offices in Ottawa and are trying to analyze the market from 50,000 feet or 40,000 feet versus what's actually happening. I mean, and to summarize their report, and we'll include a link to it just so people don't think I'm biased, but their report was basically like, in the 90s, most builders didn't pre-sell all their units. So the problem was we overbuilt, we had all this unsold inventory, and that's what the issue was. But today we don't have to worry about that because the vast majority of condos are pre-sold to investors. So once we pass this little period of adjustment that we're in, prices are going to keep going up because we have a shortage of supply. Like that was the kind of the, summarized takeaway, which again, it's like you're okay. I mean, I respect that people think Steve and I are biased because we work in real estate. But I'm going to ask you this question. If you read this report, right, and then compare what Steve and I and Ron and Dan have been talking about in the housing market the past year, that there's so many units that are underwater, can't close. The only reason some of these people can close is because the banks are turning a blind eye on what the units are actually worth, appraising them at these inflated values, basically breaking bank regulations to prop up the condo market. What is a more honest analysis of what's happening on the ground right now? Like, and tell me in the comments, what is the most realistic? And to be clear, I don't think any of us are saying it's going to tank to. I'm not predicting what's going to happen because you can't predict what governments and banks will do to prop up the market. So we can't predict the outcomes, but these are significant risks. And again, I think as someone who's reading a report from our federal housing agency, to not flag these as material risks to me is like, what are you talking about? Like, there's so many issues going on. So many buyers are defaulting. Like, yeah, it's a very odd.
Yeah, John, I think the challenge too is like, just to chime in and add to that, is like the number that we get from like actual like big developers is like 80% of pre-sales over the last number of years is sold to investors. And that's because it's just a speculative instrument, right? I mean, you're buying a piece of paper that closes in 4 or 5 years, and so you're taking some risk. And anyway, so a lot of this sells to investors. Most of these investors now, over the next call it 24 months, are going to close on these units that in many cases they paid too much money for. But not only that, they don't cash flow. They don't carry themselves. And so I think what we're seeing now on the ground is people that are closing, they're like, oh, I don't really want to sell because I paid GST, I paid transfer taxes, I got to pay realtor fees. That's a 10% hurdle rate just in fees and taxes. And so if I sell today on completion, I'm going to lose, 100 grand or 150 grand or 200 grand. So maybe I'll just wait for the market conditions to get better and I'll just lose $1,500 a month on negative cash flow rent. But how long can you actually do that is the big question. I think a lot of people that are doing like, oh, I'll just rent it out and lose $1,500 a month. I think many of them are just saying, well, I'll test the market in 6 months. I'll test it in the spring. Well, what if the prices are the same or worse? I mean, at some point you're going to have to like make a tough decision because most people can't bleed $1,000 or $1,200 or $1,500 a month negative cash flow. So that's going to add to the overall inventory 100%. Levels that I think CMHC is probably missing.
Yeah.
Again, on the ground. That's why you have to keep watching this channel.
Good plug.
And this show. Now, it's my last shift, so I'm going to allow you boys to get into a little fight. But I'm going to call time on it after because, we can't fight too long. So here we go. John and Steve tweeted opposing views on a big subject. So let us talk about it. Build Canada Homes. This is the big Mark Carney Liberal government-led initiative to build a new federal agency and to move a lot of direct funding into affordable housing. This goes beyond, so it's not just doing the lending; it's getting involved in more ways. So, Steve, you tweeted, Carney just launched Build Canada Homes, a new federal agency with $13 billion to, in quotes, scale up affordable housing, end quote. But here's the catch: none of it helps Canadians actually own a home. Build Canada will be one massive grift, a giant transfer of tax dollars to political insiders.
Oh my, tell us what you really think, Steve.
And John, you tweeted, for decades, Ottawa embraced the role of building affordable housing until they walked away from it in the 1990s. We've been living out with the fallout ever since. That's why Build Canada Homes matter. It's the federal government stepping back in, not to just fund programs, but to build, buy, and preserve affordable housing. I think that's the key word here. So we're not talking about all of the market. Now, Steve, I'm going to give you first round for the against, and then we're going to go to John for the pro.
Okay. The one thing, and maybe John will touch on this, I'll say maybe there's a benefit to this program, is I think that when we look at what's happening in the private sector, there's no new houses getting built, period. Like it's just it's frozen. It's a train wreck. And so, there's questions in the industry about, well, where are these people going to go? Where are they going to build? All these guys are going to lose their jobs. And so I think from a counter-cyclical perspective, I think that having the government sort of step in to fill some of the void on home building, because they're agnostic to market conditions, I think is probably a benefit. There's probably some good counter-cyclical policy moves there. But I just think like a $13 billion just to start the agency, just to basically effectively fund it. I'm very skeptical about the return on tax dollars that you're going to get. I think there's a role to play that, yes, the private sector can't really build affordable housing because it doesn't pencil. So you definitely need that element. I get it. I just don't think it's the panacea that is going to fix, I think when young people think about their future prospects in life, it's like the ability to like get on the housing ladder and like own a home. It's not to like, oh, I can't wait to one day rent this like modular home from the government. So that's where I kind of push back. I think ultimately you see who's going to be starting up these modular housing facilities, and I think it is ultimately very wealthy political insiders, and they'll make tons of money, and I'm happy for them. I just don't think it's going to build as many homes as I think we're being promised it will.
Ding, ding, ding. Next.
All right. I think when this is a good example. I think when two people sit in a room, a lot of times you find more common ground than you might find on Twitter and on social media. I mean, listen, I think we probably agree more than we disagree. Listen, the federal government has a role to build non-market housing. They've stepped away from that. You're like the average rent for a one bedroom in Toronto is $2,500, say. Well, you need like 90 grand a year to afford that. Most people don't make 90 grand a year. So you need non-market, non-profit, whatever kind of role it's going to be. And the government has to do that. Now, I mean, on two things where I somewhat agree with Steve. Does it address the need for owner-occupied housing in Canada? Of course it doesn't. In fact, like the government has effectively abandoned owner-occupied housing. All we're going to be building in the next 4 years is going to be affordable housing and rental housing through their MLI Select program. Owner-occupied housing starts are plummeting, right? Okay, maybe in some areas like in Alberta, they're still going up, but in BC and in Ontario, they're done. So there's no plan effectively to help the next generation buy a home. 100% agree. Is there going to be a little bit of grit? Like, is it going to be a little bit of insiders being promoted? 100%. I think that 100%. Like that. I think, but again,
That's
I'm not as
old as time,
that.
though, right? Like in any industry,
It happens in every government. Like, look at our local provincial freaking PC government, conservative government. The same thing. Like, it's always going on. Like, so I assume that's always going to happen. I think, and we don't know how it's going to play out. Again, and I agree with you. I don't think it's going to solve everything. We don't know what the outcome's going to be. That's only going to be measured in 3, 4, 5 years. But, they are doing some things that are good, like building new housing and buying like some rentals to keep them affordable. Like, I mean, I had a family just called me the other week, someone who I know, and they're freaking out because some new company bought their apartment building, giving out notices, trying to evict them. And, these people are worried because they're senior citizens. They're like, I can't afford today's rents. Where the heck am I going to move to? So, having some government agency and buy these old buildings to keep them affordable so you don't have these builders who are rent evicting people, kicking them out to jack up the rent. I mean, I think that's generally a good idea. again, how it all unfolds and what the results will be, time will tell. But yeah, it's not. It
I don't,
doesn't.
yeah, I think you and I have a lot of similar, I don't necessarily disagree with anything that you said. I think it's just like there's nuances there, and I think it's just important to sort of point out, at least from my perspective, to point out what the program is basically telling you, which is, yeah, to John's point, they've given up on the idea of trying to help people get on the housing ladder, which is yeah, it's kind of sad, but at the same time, it's like, well, yeah, like we also can't keep juicing the market too, which is like, you could go to a first time home buyer and say, hey, Mr. Johnny, we're going to give you a 50-year AM, 5% down, 50-year AM will get you on the housing ladder. I don't know if that's a good thing. It just stimulates demand. So
Yeah, 100%.
I think it's more just like, I think the takeaway for people should be here is like the signal.
Hmm.
Like the government is signaling, they're telling you something, which is like, they're kind of just, everyone's just kind of giving up their hands. Like we've tried, we've tried.
The signal is the next generation. They want to be a generation of renters rather than homeowners, effectively, is what is the signal right now. And I think
All
that's
right.
unfortunate.
Well,
But
Don Cherry would be
on that cheery
extremely
note,
disappointed. No, but he would be disappointed. This wasn't a brawl.
yeah.
You dropped your gloves and ended up hugging. So Don would be offended. I am going to play Ron McLean or whoever because I'm going out as maybe center left.
Okay.
My
Sure.
only last observation is, has the unaffordability at the bottom of the market pushed unaffordability all the way up? And if there is a rejigging where you can at least rent for a lower rate as a young professional coming into your first jobs, like we all experienced,
Mhm.
and save for the down payment for your first house, isn't that affordable rental a very important part of this puzzle? Because what a
100%
lot
it
of us
is.
don't talk about is I had a rock bottom rent in Ottawa when I first got my professional job. Not rock bottom, but I mean, I also used a cardboard box as furniture and put, cloth on it. So I was from a different generation because I want to prove to my parents I could make it. But having said that, when you are paying through the nose for rent, how can you ever save up for a down payment? So it's going to be my last center left rejoinder to both of you.
No, I agree with you. Definitely. It's important. Like for every 5,000 affordable homes that you build in Toronto, that's like 5,000 fewer people chasing market rate housing, which takes pressure off of rents, which, you know what I mean? Makes market housing more affordable. So they're all interconnected. So absolutely it matters. And the fact is, like I said before, we haven't built affordable housing in Canada for like 40 years.
I think Urmi, I think you make a good point. I think it's more just like it's almost like one's political views of like how you achieve these outcomes, right? It's like should the government go and be the ones that supplies sort of the affordable housing,
Mhm.
or should the private sector do it? If you sort of unleash the private sector, can you build enough housing? I always look at it and say it's interesting because like I do a lot of work in Calgary and tracking that market and like what's happening there is just like it's just so much easier to get a permit and there's a lot more land to build on. So they don't have necessarily the same sort of land constraints, I guess, as Vancouver, Toronto. But like what happens there is like they go through these like boom busts where it's like every time the market gets hot and the rents go up double digits, all the builders come rushing in and they build way too much stuff. And the first thing to drop in price and rent is like the crappy stuff, right? It's like the old 1960s walk-up condo. Like people's when the rents come down, people like leave, like the rents drop the most in those like old buildings or like people's basement suites. Those just get hammered because it's just like people are like, well, my basement suite was 1,500 a month, but now I can go rent that walk up because that just came down from 17 to 15. So I'm leaving my basement suite. So I find like it's really interesting. I mean, obviously, I'm very skeptical that like cities like Vancouver can add supply like markets, more elastic markets like Alberta. Um, so yeah, it's tough. There's so many nuances, right? I
Well,
mean,
long may this conversation continue. I'm going to put in a little point before I go. Some people are not going to like it, but I'm on my way out. My only observation in the GTA is we did unleash a decade in Toronto. And I think this is a Toronto story. It's not a Calgary story and it's not a Vancouver story. We unleashed a decade of investment driven condo building. This was supposed to be the answer to our problems. Young couples were going to move in with their dog and then have one kid. We now are in a micro condo hell with a bunch of inventory no one wants that investors, because they sold it to us in Toronto. We bought it, hook, line, and sinker. All the governments came out, all the investors bought the units, and this was going to be the housing for tomorrow. I just, on my way out, would like to say that after 15 years, I am dismayed. I am kind of in between. I'm obviously always leaning a little bit. I try to be center, but I'm going to admit center left. But I look forward to this discussion continuing. And on that note, I would like to talk about the future of this program. And why I'm able to smile is I'm going to miss this program so much. And I'm not smiling because I'm not going to miss you guys. And I'm only smiling because John said he'll let me back somehow, or maybe I'll just like inflame your comments. But I want to announce a future direction, which I think will keep this really robust dialogue continuing, not only across country, but like you said, Steve, not only political views, but in the back of the political views are some real disagreements amongst economists about how to solve the problem. So let's be honest, it's not all politics, right? There's a lot of expert analysis that is not decided on how to solve these problems, not only in North America, but around the world. So John and Steve will be returning. This roundtable will continue. John will be hosting, and we will have another wonderful guest who I think you will all love, Ben Rabidou, who's an excellent commentator on all things macroeconomics, and he will take up the third seat here. And I'm very much looking forward to you guys being my staple listening every month because I will miss you otherwise. So
it's big shoes to fill, but Ben's got his work cut out for him. So yeah, Urmi, we're gonna miss you. An excellent house, but
we will. And thank you, Urmi, for, I don't know, it's been like what, 3 years since we started the roundtable?
Three. It's longer than you guys think. You guys convinced me to take over from Jesse Baines, who was so excellent. And then every year we did the math. We figured it was a year more than we thought. So I think it's at least 3 years. It's been so much fun. I really, really, both of you, whatever your views on, the key is, and I always believe this, whoever we are in this country, we have to take what we're being told. We have to be good Canadians, yes, but we have to question the data, use our intelligence, and see what's going on the ground. And one thing that Canadians can do is use data to come to some agreement, some center ground, and hopefully find our way to a solution. But if we do not pressure our politicians to stop acting like sloganeering crazy people, we are going to find no solution. So that's my final please do to you. And also, there's an opportunity to see Steve, I think, out in Vancouver. Steve, you have one more live event. That'll be my last plug.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I appreciate that. October 21st, myself and my co-host, the Looney Hour, we're doing a live event in Vancouver. And Dan Foch and Nick Hill, who run the Canadian Real Estate podcast, are going to do like a housing panel as well. So we're going to miss you both, John especially, but on the housing panel. But yeah, if anyone wants, I think there's still some tickets. So maybe we'll have an Eventbrite link or maybe that we can throw in there or something.
Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes. So this is my last sign off. I want to thank all our amazing viewers, listeners to the show. As always, put your comments. And John is at John Pasalis on X Twitter. Steve is at Steve Saretsky. The show is at Move Smartly. The show continues to be at Move Smartly, and the show continues. And I just thank you again for all the support from both of you, from our audiences and everyone. And I will stay tuned. And I hope to be coming back, maybe where I can advocate a little bit for where maybe other parts of society would benefit from some relief from our housing affordability crisis.